Okay, last video for week. We'll just go ahead and call it week 2. I like to refer to the first week as week 0 because we don't really, get started on learning the material until week 2. But we'll just call it week 2. So last video for week 2 is we're going to tackle the. We're almost at the end of book 2. We're not going to finish book 2. I thought we did this week, but we actually the weekend reading will get you finished with book 2 and into book 3, or finished with book 3. So we're going to tackle the last little bit here, and there's some really important sections in today's discussion, especially with section 7 when we get into a really fleshing out of the concept of absurdism and how also belief in God approaches that. And it can be a really weighty discussion, but I don't shy away from those. You're seniors, and I believe that now's the time to have these conversations before you go to college, and we'll be forced with having them with maybe a less sympathetic teacher. So, and maybe not. Maybe you'll have great ones. The idea that every college professor is this raving atheist is just not true. But I know I would like to have some of this conversation with you now where you can ask me questions. So let's start with section 5, though, which is not going to handle that. It's not quite as heavy. Section 5 is really dealing with at least the first half. The whole section is about Rambert and his situation and kind of his development. I told you Camus likes to kind of dedicate certain sections just to development of one particular character, and this is a Rambert section. He's starting by going through all these different legal avenues, trying his best to get out of this town. In fact, page 105, 106, 107, into 108 are all about that, okay? And I've highlighted several sections that we can talk about in class, but again, try to respect your time and not go too deep into this. What he's learning over and over, though, is that he thinks his situation is special since he is not from this town, and, he feels like he should be able to leave. And one of the things that Camus is doing with this is showing us that when bad times come, we always want to think our situation is in some way special, that for some reason rules shouldn't apply to us. And the fact is that everybody's situation is special and that it's different. You could have found anyone who wanted to leave town and have them explain why they think they should be able to leave town, and they can feel like theirs is just as special. But the fact is the situation remains. And while it may seem unfair for Rambert to have to remain in this town, the fact is if they let him go, the odds, there's a chance he could spread plague. And if they let him go, then what about all the other people who think they're special? This idea about, you're better than other people's situation for some reason, it's a bad trait we have as humans. Once again, and I know you're tired of hearing me say this, but it goes back to what separates me from everyone else and what makes me special and what makes me not part of the other. And that's kind of the problem he's running into. But the fact is they're not going to let him go. So now he's left. He's going to have to start looking into illegal means, which we'll see later. But what we do get a kind of interesting statement about him near the end here is look what it does to him. I mean, initially he's probably thinking, well, they're obviously going to let me go. I have a special situation. But now it's turning into something a lot scarier for him. So let me read a couple of passages. Since the only thing gained by all this expenditure of energy, Rambert told Rue with a hint of bitterness, was that it served to keep his mind off of his predicament. In fact, the rapid progress of the plague practically escaped his notice. Also, it made the days pass more quickly, and given the situation in which the whole town was placed, it might be said that every day lived through brought everyone, provided he survived, 24 hours nearer the end of his ordeal. Ryu could but admit the truth of this reasoning, but to his mind its truth was rather too general an order. So right away we learned that the busyness has kept Rambert from focusing on the scary things that surround him. So that's a good thing. He said that it also points out, and this is kind of the way we have to look even at the situation we're in now, is that every day you make it through, we know we're one day closer to normalcy setting back in. Now, I refuse to use this term, the new normal, because this isn't going to be normal unless the coronavirus never leaves us, in which case that's a whole different thing that I'm not even willing to look into right now. But the fact is that eventually we'll go away from one-way halls and we won't all be having to wear masks. And so, but each day you survive it, one of the things you can hang on to is that, well, I'm 24 hours closer to us being done with this. And that's kind of what they have to do. Again, a lot of this book is about how our mind works to help defend us against these scary things that are happening around us daily. And thank God we have these abilities, okay? 108, there's this brief glimpse of hope, and this isn't meant to be funny, but I laugh at this section every time. Rambert thinks for a second, hey, maybe I'm going to get out because he gets a letter and he gets called in and asks a bunch of questions about like where he's from and just basically demographic stuff. So he might be thinking they're developing a pass for him to get out of town, but the fact is they're really just collecting information on everyone in town, especially the people who are not from there, so that in case they die, there's someone they can contact. What a like roller coaster. You think I'm about to get out of here, and then all of a sudden, no, we're just collecting information in case you get the plague and die. And that completely deflates this poor man. And the rest of this section, the pages 108 through 110, just show how it feels like he's almost giving up. And really, we're going to rebuild Rambert later. He's going to go through these illegal channels to almost escape, but then eventually he's going to change his mind and realize that what absurdism is built around, the idea that you can only impact the day you have, the moments you have in the area you're in, and all this worrying about everything else is absurd. It's pointless. So eventually we're going to rebuild him. But right now, this is a low point for him. He's broken. Let me read you a passage that sums that up. It says, seated in the empty cafe, Rambert looked pathetically lost, a mere shade among the shadows, and Ryu guessed this was the hour when he felt most derelict. It was indeed the hour of day when all the prisoners of the town realized their dereliction, and each was thinking that something, no matter what, must be done to hasten their deliverance. Ryu turned hurriedly away. So Ryu can't really get into this because he doesn't want to start thinking that way. But it's that point where these people are they're at their lowest point, and what are you going to do when you get to your low point? Okay, so this is going to take us to section 6. Section 6, man, there's something about this first part of section 6 that really kind of hit home with me because it talks about how all of a sudden, and remember we talked about in the very first section, we talked about this town being like climate-wise, I said similar to Mobile. It has like kind of cold and really hot. And section 6 is when the heat sets in, and it causes everyone to get extra irritable and angry. And we've seen that happen here. As March, April, and May even. I saw a lot of people out walking, getting exercise and stuff because the weather was pleasant. But now it's miserable. And I was doing that. I was out walking every day, and that really made me feel better and made me feel like I had accomplished at least something in a day. But then it got to where it was so hot you could only walk at like 5 or 6 in the morning or 8 o'clock at night. And then the rain started, and that made it muggy and gross. And it just got to be where, you see less and less of that. And the less and less we're out doing that, the more and more pointless we began to feel. So the heat causes this trouble. And in this town, in this story, it causes violence where people were literally attacking the sentries at the gates. So now guns have been brought into the picture, and now it's coming off even more like a police state. So not a good situation by any stretch. So, the heat's bad. There you go. That's my lesson. Let me read you now. Those of you who have ever read The Great Gatsby, you're the one group that when I first filmed this. Now, if I reuse this film next year, the group will have read The Great Gatsby. But my group that I'm teaching this to in the immediate has not read The Great Gatsby, and you didn't get my lecture about prose being beautiful. Camus doesn't have a lot of those sections. I mean, he's an excellent writer, but he doesn't have that like magical section. But here is one I want to read to you, okay? And it comes on page 112. He says, the sky, too, had lost the spaciousness of those June twilights when our horizons seemed infinitely remote. In the markets, the flowers no longer came in buds. They were already in full bloom, and after the morning's marketing, the dusty pavements were littered with trampled petals. It was plain to see that spring had spent itself, lavished its ardor on the myriads of flowers that were bursting everywhere into bloom, and now was being crushed out by the twofold onslaught of heat and plague. For our fellow citizens, that summery sky and the street thick in dust, gray as their present lives, had the same ominous import as the 100 deaths now weighing daily on the town. That incessant sunlight and those bright hours associated with siesta or with holidays no longer invited, as in the past, to frolics and flirtation on the beaches. Now they rang hollow in the silence of the closed town. They had lost the golden spell of a happier summer. Plague had killed all colors, vetoed pleasure. That is maybe, and I don't even want to say maybe, I think it is the most powerful use of language in the entire book. Now, what is it saying? Nothing. It's saying that the heat and the plague have made what used to be a fun time of summer when people would go to the beach and all the things that came with the beauty of summer, it's robbed them of it, which we endured that, by the way. It's taken it away. So it's not a real big thematic theme, but it's just like paintings. Some paintings are beautiful just because they're beautiful, and some songs are beautiful just because the notes together sound beautiful. Well, this is an example of wording in a way that is artistic. This is the part of writing that can't be taught. This is something you have or you don't. It's not because he's using big words, it's because he's using the right words. And I think that's something that we can learn is that, big, fancy, $10 words are not going to make your paper better. It's always about using the right word. And even though there's 55 synonyms for the word, there's one word that is the perfect word for that situation. And in this paragraph, Camus has nailed the right word in every section, and it is really pretty, and it is the most powerful bit of prose in here if we're talking about artistically. Okay, now we're not a creative writing course, so I'm not going to sit and dwell on this. I just wanted to show it to you because I think it's impressive. All right. At this point, we get a little bit more about Theroux. We bring his notebooks back up, not Theroux himself personally. They're saying he observed something. And man, I'm wondering when we'll see some of this happen in art. And we may have already seen it, but they're manipulating the numbers. And I want you to understand, manipulating numbers doesn't mean you lie about them. It means how you present them changes how they're received. So before they were giving out the weekly death totals, their town changes it to the daily death totals. So what does that do? Well, 150 sounds a lot better than 950. So when they do that, it makes it feel like it's not quite as bad. You could see this being, for example, today, maybe people, instead of talking about the number of cases, they like to focus on the number of deaths. Because in that case, we're like, oh, so it's not that bad because at least the people aren't dying. And we're ignoring the fact that a lot of the people who have this are in the hospital and could be, closer to death, or the suffering that these people are going through, even if they don't die. The only thing that matters is not death. That's one of the things that we have to think about when we talk about plagues or pandemics is that death isn't the only result that matters. A lot of people who contract COVID-19, they get better, but what we're seeing is health issues that remain, and like we have a family member here at the school whose wife contracted this, and she's been battling it forever. She contracted it way back in, I think, March, and she's still not 100%. So this isn't something that, well, it's if you don't die, then you're good. That's not how this goes. Okay. I laugh now. I may overstep my bounds here just a tad bit, but you guys know I don't mean anything by it. They joke around here about how people start coming up with these like old wives' tales basically about what could help cure the plague. So like one of them was peppermint lozenges. So everybody goes out and buys those thinking that's going to fix it. And I laugh because it makes me think about how, every time I turn around, there's a new medicine being pushed in the media that all of a sudden is going to be the cure for this. Like it was flu medicine for one time. It was that hydroxychloroquine. I don't know how to say it right. That the president was pushing all of this stuff that's going to be the magic bullet that fixes it. And it's all nonsense. None of that stuff is it. Just like for this. But, people grasp at anything they can to feel hope. And that's okay. You don't want to rob people of that as long as they're not, drinking bleach or something, which in that case, they're dead. We also end up, they make an interesting comment about, I think it's Theroux that says, only if it had been an earthquake, a good bad shock, and there you are. You count the dead and living, and that's the end of it. He's pointing out that the thing is not, and I agree with this, to be honest with you. He says an earthquake, it hits, the people die, you start rebuilding. With stuff like the Black Death or coronavirus, it's continues. You don't know when it's going to stop. And that in some ways is worse than the death toll, is because, you constantly are like, it's the unknown. Is this going to get better or not? Now, the rest of section 6 kind of and into section 7, it's going to start like developing a little bit of discussion about Father Panelou's speech and about faith in general. And for some of you, this is going to be kind of a dicey area to discuss because I'll be honest with you, the characters in this book are not people of faith, with the exception of Father Panelou. They're just not. Our main characters, in fact, Ryu is going to discuss in section 7 how he doesn't believe in God at all. Don't be offended by that. Understand his situation and let's look at it, okay? So 116, Theroux says, at the beginning of pestilence and when it ends, there's always a propensity for rhetoric. In the first case, habits have not yet been lost. In the second, they're returning. It is the thick of the calamity that one gets hardened to the truth, in other words, to silence. So let's wait. So Theroux's pointing out that, Father Panelou's speech, he says at the beginning, there's a lot of that sort of thing. A lot of blame making, a lot of people with, thinking they know what happens. And then at the end, people are like, again, bringing it back. He says, but in the middle, a lot of times people just clam up and shut up and just get to their day-to-day existence. Now, I would argue that that is one of the areas where we see a difference in this book and what happened in our world. I haven't seen people shut up yet. I guess this is the difference in social media. No social media in 1940, way too much in 2020. Everyone's an expert and thinks their opinion matters, and they think that everyone else should be forced to endure it. And they're, vomiting up on the keyboard every day, and that's repulsive. It's why I don't have social media anymore and would have no desire to jump back into that world. Um, there's discussion of saintliness, which is interesting among people who don't believe in God, because none of our main characters, besides Father Pantaloo, do. So Taru doesn't, but he talks about, he seems obsessed with the concept of saintliness. Now, you can easily say that a belief in being saintly and not being a believer, because there's certain attributes that go with saintly people. It's about being selfless. It's about working for others no matter what. And we do see that in almost all of our main characters, actually, even though they're not doing it based on faith, which is a whole nother discussion. All right. We also get a discussion about a new newspaper popping up called the Plague Chronicle, which seems to be like a lot of our news stations now that like dedicate huge sections to coronavirus. I got on YouTube the other day and there was a button where you could click on the most recent coronavirus information. So, I mean, we do kind of fill our heads with this too. But that part isn't interesting to me. What is interesting to me is they talk about the people who they'll go and get this newspaper, and then they all go out of their way to not be facing each other while they're reading it. And this idea of just, we're not in this together. We're all separate. Remember, when we first saw it, the idea was we are all in this together, but we've now degenerated into this like total it's about me type of grouping. He says, I'll read you the exact words. He says, a queer thing is how the passengers all try to keep their backs turned to their neighbors, twisting themselves into grotesque attitudes in the idea being, of course, to avoid contagion. And of course, that's like with us with masks today and having to stand 6 feet away. That's hard for me. I agree with the practice, by the way, but it's really hard for me as a teacher. And some of you have noticed this. I'm used to walking around in the tables and even sitting down at the tables and conversing with you guys. This standing in my area or behind my desk is murder on me. But I understand why, and we have to do it. But it's like we got an email that told us about being aware of the amount of time we spend close to individuals and keeping like this internal clock where eventually you kind of back away from people after a certain amount of time so that you can, because teachers getting sick is just not something that school can handle right now. So we have to stay healthy. And it's hard for me to feel that way. It feels like I'm being rude and disrespectful. So, but these people here obviously don't care anymore. And then we see two other things that are important in this section. All right, we notice that in an effort to combat the bad feelings people are getting, they're doing a couple of things. One, they're spending like crazy. So when the pandemic first hit, I know that we in my house were really careful about holding on to our money and saving it, because we didn't want there to be a situation where either I or Mitzi lost our jobs and were then forced to have to rely on this money that we didn't have. So we were being safe. But as things went on, I spent a lot of time on Amazon looking for things. I mean, I bought a really fancy, expensive record player and nice speakers, and I probably bought 100 different albums with money that, because we did keep our job. My wife actually was making a little more money because of overtime. And we started, ordering things from DoorDash and stuff, which is a money pit. And, we started all of a sudden spending more and more because it kind of made you feel good. You looked forward to the mail coming because you ran down there and just for a few minutes there was excitement over something new. And, that's another defense mechanism that we use just to try to get through and not focus so much on the negative. The other thing they do is, let's see. No, that was the main one. Oh, no, here it is. I found it. It said, many of the customers spend several minutes methodically wiping their plates. Not long ago, some restaurants put up notices, our plates, knives, and forks guaranteed sterilized, but gradually they discontinued publicity of this order since their customers came in any case. So you also see people going way out of their way trying to feel control, whether it's spending money and buying things so that you feel good for 5 minutes, or whether it's I'm going to bring my own plate to the restaurant and sterilize it myself because I know I have control over that, even though it really doesn't make a difference in the Black Death. It might with coronavirus, but for them, and it's just looking for any way you can feel less powerless, which is something that the plague does to us. Plague and pandemic do to us. It makes us feel like we have no control over our lives. We also see kind of sadly that there is this waning, even among the faithful, in their belief in God, which is sad. Let me read this to you. It says, they all make haste towards some trivial objective that seems of more immediate interest than God. You would think people would be more focused on that, but it's like, that seems so distant to a lot of these people that they look for the immediate cures instead. It says, in the early days when they thought this epidemic was much like other epidemics, but once these people realized their instant peril, they gave their thoughts to pleasure, and all their hideous fears that stamped their faces in the daytime were transformed in the fiery, dusty nightfalls into a sort of hectic exaltation and unkept freedom fevering their blood. So what's happened is these people realize that they may die, so they're throwing caution to the wind and just doing whatever, and that's really not a positive thing. We're really seeing society fall apart in this book, much like not to this level, but we're seeing it in our own society too, which is quite sad, to be honest. Okay, that takes us to section 7, which section 7 is a powerful one. And this is the absurdism section. I introduced you to this way of thinking earlier, but this is the section that really deals with it. So we start off with there being a point by Teru that with the way things are going, within 2 weeks to a month, Dr. Ryu as a doctor is going to be useless because he's not going to be able to do anything to help anyone. There's no medication. People are dying by the truckload. And he's like, you're pretty much going to be useless. And Ryu realizes that. He says, I know. For a lot of us, that would be reason to quit. He doesn't feel that way. And this is one of the things that I really admire Dr. Ryu and his dedication to. I'm going to do what needs to be done, even if it's pointless, because otherwise, what is my purpose here? All right, this is how he dictates his purpose. It's, I am a doctor. I have these skills. I'm going to do everything I can, even if it's pointless, because otherwise I just have to give up, like we just saw Rambert doing in section 5. I don't want to be like that, is what his thought is. They discuss kind of scary thought of conscripting. Conscripting is basically drafting citizens to make them be like people going around and fighting the plague by, cleaning things, hunting down fleas, that sort of thing. And, you would think you would just ask for volunteers and people would do it, but they don't. So now they're thinking about forcing people to. And anytime you start thinking about forcing people to do things, you run into the problems we're having today. All right. Most people, if they came to the realization on their own that if I wear a mask, not only am I less likely to get sick, but I am less likely to get others sick. A lot of people are good people and would do that on their own. But as soon as they're told they have to, something about Americans, we feel like that now we have to fight against it because you can't tell me what to do. That whole sordid nonsense. So we see that could obviously be a problem. Let me see, 124. Yeah, Teru says, I've heard that the authorities are thinking of a sort of conscription of the population, and all men in good health will be required to help in fighting the plague. Says the prefect can't make up his mind if he's going to do it or not. If he daren't risk compulsion, why not call for voluntary help? Well, it's been done, and the response was poor. And then this sentence. Officialdom can never cope with something really catastrophic, and the remedial measures they think up are hardly adequate for a common cold. They're pointing out that the government, at that point, that they really are ineffective. He says they can't really cope with something very catastrophic because if they start forcing people to do stuff, people start, refusing and becoming violent. And then the stuff they do actually are able to do that people will accept is useless. So kind of a sad statement that may have a little more truth than we want to admit. Okay, now then, the rest of this section is, though, this is the deep stuff. There's a discussion about Father Panalu's speech, and this is between Ryu and Teru. So let's look at a couple of lines. He says, this is Ryu talking. He says, I've seen too much of hospitals to relish any idea of collective punishment. But as you know, Christians sometimes say that sort of thing without really thinking it. They're better than they seem. Now, I love the fact that Ryu is not hostile towards Christianity. He's giving them the benefit of the doubt. He's saying Christians say this sort of thing a lot. He says they just don't think through it. It's not that they're bad people. However you think like Panalu that the plague has its good side. It opens men's eyes and forces them to take thought. So Teru's like, but do you agree with him? Throw the God part out. Do you think that it has a positive? And this is where Dr. Ryu gets a little fired up. He said, every ill that flesh is heir to, basically can do this. What's true of all the evils in the world is true of plague as well. It helps men to rise above themselves. All the same, when you see the misery it brings, you need to be a madman or a coward or stone blind to give in tamely to the plague. So he points out maybe that's the case. Maybe it does make people think, but it's not a good trade-off in his opinion. He says, if you actually were to go and look at it, and we're going to see Father Panaloo later actually watch a young child who's done nothing and is innocent die from this plague, and it is going to alter the way he sees things. All right. Then Teru flat out asks, do you believe in God, doctor? Now, Teru knows, but he's asking him because he wants to hear what the doctor says. Now, Ryu becomes very uncomfortable, but this is his response. No, but what does that really mean? I'm fumbling in the dark, struggling to make something out, but I've long ceased finding that original. And he's like, I don't, but how am I different than other people? He says, I'm still looking for something. So, more than an atheist, he would probably be tagged an agnostic, but he still is like, I don't know. But he says, I've learned long ago that I'm no different than anyone else, that I'm struggling just like even the people who claim, in his opinion anyway, the people who claim to believe in God still struggle to find things. It's not like they become Christians, then automatically they never have any problems again. He says, this is Teru. He says, why do you yourself show such devotion considering you don't believe in God? So he's like, if you don't believe in God, what is it? Where are you getting your drive and your desire to be such a good person? Ryu said that he'd already answered that if he believed in an all-powerful God, he would cease curing the sick and leave that to him. But no one in the world believed in a God of that sort. No, not even Panaloo, who believed that he believed in such a God. And this was proved by the fact that no one ever threw himself on Providence completely. So Dr. Ryu has an interesting response. He says, well, if I truly believed in God the way Father Panaloo says he does, I would allow him to heal people and wait on him and not act on it myself. Now, I feel like that's not a great answer, but yet there's some depth to that. He does point out that a lot of people would just give up and not try, and we want to avoid that. Now, I know a lot of Christians don't do that. Okay, a lot of them will still show up and fight, knowing that you've been put here by God to be the tools to help people. You're not waiting on a miracle for everything. You are that miracle. You've been placed here to take action. We don't have to rely on God to come down from the clouds and fix things for us because we've been given the resources and tools to fix things. Yes, including things like this pandemic. There are a lot of ways we could improve on this if we would just quit being idiots and behave the way we're supposed to. Endure a little bit of inconvenience, endure a little bit of pain so that as a whole we can get through this and become better for it. But no, we have to worry about our own personal wants and desires, and that's where we deserve what we've got, to be honest. A little bit more, because I don't want to go down that road, because you guys can get me really raging if we go there. He says, let me find the other part I wanted. Okay, this is where we're getting into like really the depths of absurdism. This is Ryu talking. He says, I have no idea what's awaiting me or what will happen when all this ends. For the moment, I know this. There are sick people and they need curing. Later on, perhaps they'll think things over and so shall I. But what's wanted now is to make them well. I defend them as best I can. That's all. And that is the positive side of absurdist thought, is that there may be no purpose to this. Everyone might still die of the plague, but I'm not giving up and giving it into them. And it may be pointless for me to keep trying, but that's all I can do. And I'm going to do what I can do no matter whether it's pointless or not. And I love that thinking with Ryu, that I'm going to step up and I'm going to do what I know how to do, and I'm going to save one person or two people or no people, but I'm not going to give up. That's not who I am. All right, little last. Oh, there's another good bit here. Teru asking basically, who are you fighting against? And Ryu responds, I haven't a notion, Teru. I assure you, I haven't a notion. When I entered this profession, I did it abstractedly, so to speak, because I had a desire for it, because it meant a career like another, one that young men often aspire to. Perhaps, too, because it was particularly difficult for a workman's son like myself. And then I had to see people die. Do you know that there are some who refuse to die? Have you ever heard a woman scream never with her last gasp? Well, I have. And then I saw that I could never get hardened to it. I was a young then, and I was outraged by the whole scheme of things, or so I thought. Subsequently, I grew more modest. Only I've never managed to get used to seeing people die. That's all I know. Yet, after all, and then he kind of trails off. So he's like, here's the thing. I fight because I don't like seeing people die. I've endured it, and I've watched it, and I'm never going to accept it, and I'm going to always stand against it. And that right there is heroism. That is nobility on a different level, and it's something that I wish more of us had in us, that I'm going to fight until they put me in the ground. And that's what he believes. And man, Taru is just hammering him. He says, you know, your victories will never be lasting. He points out, you know, that people are going to die. Even if you save them now, they're going to die eventually. And again, that's the absurdist part. All right. So if you go with logic, you're like, well, if that's the case, why not just let people die and never try? But, and the answer from an absurdist point of view is, I don't know, except that I have this ability and I don't choose to give up and I'm going to keep fighting. Um, and he says, and this is sad. He says, only I now can picture what this plague must mean for you. And this is again Taru speaking to Ryu. He says, and then Ryu says, yes, a never-ending defeat. And he basically says, this is how it hurts him. I have to sit and watch. No matter what I do, people are still going to die, and I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep trying, and that may seem pointless, but the fact is that this is what I was put here for. Um, and this is like such a like chill bump scene where Taru says, "Who taught you all of this, doctor?" And the doctor replies, "Suffering." In other words, he says, "I've learned this through watching people endure pain and misery, and that's why I'm the way I am." Such a powerful internal section here with so much to discuss, so much to unpack that I could fill 5 or 6 videos like this with it. You know, I guarantee you when we talk about this in class, there's no way I get finished. The bell's going to ring mid-sentence on me. But this part I love. You know, and I disagree with his faith-based thing, but I do see how you can mix these two and the idea that, you know, there are elements of our life that seem pointless. And you don't just want to say, well, God put me here for a reason. We need to think about the reason. And start thinking about, you know, what we've been blessed with, the tools we've been blessed with, the resources we've been blessed with, and how we keep fighting no matter what. And that's such a powerful thing. And that's really the reason I wanted to teach you this book. It's one of the 2 main reasons. So anyway, guys, we're over 30 minutes, and I apologize. This chapter is one that gets me every time. So I'm going to end here. This will end the second week of our teaching. We will finish this book next week. I'll have another series of videos for you out then, and I hope that you're at this point like seeing the purpose in this book, and that you are, you know, even enjoying it maybe and what it has to say, because enjoyment's not about feeling good. It's about making us think. And if it adjusts our life if even just a little bit, it makes you rethink the apathy and just total give upness. That's not a word, but that we have in our country, and the teenagers particularly, you guys have. If we can abandon that, I'm telling you, you can change this entire our country and maybe even our world in a generation. And that's what I'm here for. Once again, as a teacher, a lot of what I do feels pointless. You know, I come in here, I talk about the plague. Half of you have your heads down, half of you are on your phone, and in times it feels like it's pointless. But the fact is I'm not quitting. I'm going to keep going because there may be one kid. And if that one kid makes a difference in the lives of 2 other people, then there's 3 right there that have been impacted. And that's worth every minute of being up here on a Saturday filming videos. So, guys, have a wonderful evening. If you're watching this on Friday, have a great weekend. And I will see you again as we start thinking about closing this book up next week.